So, ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce you to this episode of NEWSHOUND. It's been a case happening for a while now, something that I have personal experience with, which is building and building, and it's petered out. It's gone poof. There's been, of course, the main people involved in exposing it who have got any weight behind them is the Guardian and the BBC, and both of them seem to be using the same old characters that are close to power to try and damage limitation their own behavior, one of BBC's own. And I think the BBC dragged in the Guardian into this, or got the Guardian involved in this, because they couldn't do it alone without looking like they're trying to manage do damage limitation. They needed someone to help them do that and give them an honest face. But at the end of the day, this was someone who was employed by the BBC. BBC hired people to work for him as well. He raped people. He used young girls as currency. He's affected the lives of more than hundreds of girls. And they've given out 6 girls' stories and not said much about it, even though they have all of the information. They have all of the information available. So they are, at the moment, trying to manipulate this story, the Westwood scandal. It should be a scandal, especially amongst the black community in the UK. It should be a scandal. They've manipulated it so it's like a poof. There is nothing. It is weak. People have to push slowly because they've slowed down all of what they've done is they've tried to limit it so that people don't push and it doesn't cause momentum, which then forces them to have massive reviews and all this. They have little tiny reviews over here, little tiny reviews over there, little investigation, a couple of articles here, and we're going to look at it. And this is a special case for me. It's about a man called Tim Westwood. DJ. He worked for Radio 1 back in the day, then went on for Capital Radio. Capital Radio and Radio 1 are people I've had dealings with, the people who represent them, in various hotels. I told a story recently on Twitter very quickly. Someone actually went, oh, what a load of bollocks. But it's not, I mean, when you work nights in hotels, you see loads of things. You've got 300 people staying in a hotel, and you've got like 2 members of staff on. You're the managing the place. You know what you do? You see everything. You see all of the problems. You see all of the issues. You go into everybody's room when they're causing trouble. And say 300 people staying in a hotel. Well, I can tell you, 280 of them will be very well behaved and asleep all night. 20 of them at least, 30 maybe even 40, some dated nights even more, depending on what's going on, will not go to sleep. They'll be up, they'll be partying, they'll be enjoying themselves, and others are doing illicit behavior. You know, you find lots of drugs, lots of prostitution, lots of all of these things. So I told a story the other day about how I was working in a hotel. It's down Cardiff Bay. It's right opposite where Capital Radio had their offices down that way, and we had people who worked for Capital Radio come and stay at the hotel and regularly, and one of the bosses come down to stay, and he come back one night, and you know, like I say, you talk with some people, and this guy was, I didn't like him. He was like greasy, sweaty, bald and chubby, bleh, and he just seemed like sticky as a personality. He's like, God, I don't like him at all. And he was obviously high, probably a bit drunk too, and had been out through the night. Like I say, I worked nights in hotels for years. That's why I saw all of the raucous behavior. And he, about half an hour earlier, I had kicked out some kid from hanging out in the car park in his car. It was a private car park for the hotel. I'd seen some guy doing something, gone over there, and he's like jacking up. He looks like he's jacking up. He's like sticking a needle, got the old thing, hanging out his car. And I'm like, mate, what are you doing? Get out. Like, and he's like, I'm taking AIDS medication. And I was like, okay, right. Well, are you staying here? No. Okay, get out. So he went. And when I was talking to this guy, who was one of the heads of Capital Radio, and he was telling me that I was at the time I was in a band called Bomb Alaska, and we had real trouble in getting any exposure. Of course, you do when you're in a band and you don't sign up to your soul to Satan. You don't get onto the big labels anyway, and that sort of stuff. You don't make people what people want to hear. You make what you want to make. So you don't really care what people. And I'm like, I had seen the music industry fall apart in Cardiff. There was no longer as many clubs to play. There was no longer as many music nights and music venues going on in Cardiff. It was getting pretty sad. And I was saying to him, all of this, and he was saying, well, no one wants it. It's not sellable. And we won't pay any of your music, will we? We won't pay any of that. We won't play anything. We'll play things that we know people will be listening to. So it'll have to be things that are in the charts. And then we have people, big companies who come to us, big players, and they give us the best music, and we play only the best music, and all of this crap. And then this kid who had been in the car, he must have been about 18, 19, came into the hotel looking down, like, because he had been kicked out already by me, and the guy was like, oh, he's with me, and he was a rent boy. And he went up to his room. Then he like smiled, gave this like little smug look, like, I'm gonna have sex with this kid, and went upstairs. And like I was saying kid, he was like 18, 19, but he looked terrible. He looked really off his face, and he had just admitted that he had AIDS, and he was going upstairs to have sex with this guy, and it was just grotesque, and it was really emblematic of how I saw Capital Radio. So I went, oh God, oh, they're not nice. Well, that's exactly what I expect. I remember going and talking to a lot of my friends who like musicians, pop independent musicians, and saying that's what the corporations look like. That's what they look like. They look evil. And BBC, of course, they've got a history. I mean, BBC Radio, what is it? It's like the fucking priesthood. I really mean it. Think about it. BBC Radio is like the Catholic priesthood. At one point, you've got like, what was it, like 12% of Catholic priests were believed to be abusing children in America at one point. Was it something like that? I think that's the wonderful movie that came out about the true story behind that stated something along those lines, and that's just unbelievable. And when you know a certain statistic, you know that the likelihood is probably more, and so that was crazy. But radio DJs, famous radio DJs, like so many of them, Rolf Harris, I think he was on BBC radio back in the day. Jimmy Savile, of course, one of the most famous of the BBC radio DJs, and you got loads of others who bit the dust over the past decade because they got caught out for doing things when they were younger, and some of them were like national treasures. OBEs, royals honor them all of the time, and all of this, and the whole world watched on like, oh my God, the 60s and 70s and 80s were disgusting, weren't they? Everybody said. And at the same time, the 90s and noughties were as disgusting. But we just didn't know about the people who were committing crimes then, who were grooming girls or children, who were molesting children, young girls, really young boys. That's what was going on. It was going on in the BBC, actually in where the studios were, in the dressing rooms, rape of children. And people are like, oh, well, it's okay. They had an inquiry and they admitted that Jimmy Savile molested nearly 1,000 children. And you just don't understand. People can't understand and can't quite. That method, that routine we've got for holding them to account didn't do anything, isn't happening anything. They're not coming out and being honest now. They're doing the same thing as within Savile. They're trying to damage control, damage limitation. Now, I had mentioned Tim Westwood myself in 2019 in a tweet. I think it was 2019, where I mentioned a load of different people. I was pissed off loads of different people, including like people like Prince Andrew and stuff. They're all part of this establishment, got claws in the establishment. Tim Westwood being an establishment DJ in an establishment BBC, the British, its institution, auntie. She's over the top of you, telling you what to believe all the time. It is a terribly Orwellian institution nowadays as well, in its activities, in what it does, and so many links. So Tim Westwood, I mentioned about him and my own experience in 2019, and my own experience. I'll show you a little clip, and you can go read it yourself. And um, I tried to get a load of people, and this still might happen. No, I tried to get a load of people on the independent media scene to do something and say something about Tim Westwood, because I met different people who had met him, had experiences with him, and are independent journalists. And a lot of the problem is when you're in this sort of realm, you're constantly trying to dodge them taking legal action to scupper your ability to speak. So, for instance, with me, I had Nicole Junkerman, who's an associate at Jeffrey Epstein, try and censor me through a regional Berlin court and make me pay for her censorship of me. They tried to charge me 1,000 and something euros for her taking me to court to silence my voice when I'm just repeating things that are true. That sort of stuff, is something that people experience all over the independent news scene. And I kind of understand. I understand that it's quite hard at the beginning. I'm different with Tim Westwood because I had an experience with him. I had 3 experiences with him while working in the Hilton Hotel in Cardiff, which is a 5-star hotel in Cardiff. I'm going to say the same thing most people say about these sort of things, I'm going to say the same thing. I was young. I was stupid. I got my first job there when I was 19. I was a young 19 as well. I was all over the place. I was undiagnosed with Graves' disease, so I had loads and loads of wild hormonal stuff going on inside me all of the time. So I was just going around taking drugs, living party life, working in a 5-star hotel. First job as a porter on the concierge department at the start, and then later on as a night receptionist, and then later on as a shift leader. They kept promoting me, which was really strange. They also, to all of the people, if you want to sue them, it might be right now. But if you went for those jobs at the same time as me, and I got the job instead of you, so I know a few people. Dan, he's one of them who were like that. They didn't give me an interview. They interviewed you for hours. They interviewed loads of people for hours, and they just told me I had the job beforehand and just gave me the job. This was like a twisted, crooked organization from the off. And not one point during in my 2 promotions did I have an interview. Both times I was told, you've got the job, don't say anything, because everybody else has to go through the interview process for legal purposes. So, I don't know why they kept promoting me. I think they kept promoting me because I could interact with these guests with confidence, and I didn't really care. I didn't get oh my God, look at these famous people, I like to mess around with them. So I met a fair few BBC personalities, because as soon as the Hilton opened up, it became one of the mainstay places for the BBC people to rest. So when they were filming any type of drama, BBC drama, we'd have a group of people staying in a hotel, and they'd have found locations nearby, and they'll be filming it around nearby. And BBC Wales productions, of course, were really, really popular then. And when BBC Wales brought people down, they'd stayed in a hotel. And so there was other DJs who were working for BBC who I met during that period. So Trevor Nelson, another DJ on the hip hop R&B scene, very famous BBC DJ. I met him. I actually had a bet with him that I knew something, I knew his room number or something, and I lost the bet, and he didn't take the money off me. Oh, damn, the shame of it. Trevor Nelson, he was a nice guy. You kind of remember your conversations with each of these people, because I was showing how much I knew about rap. I've been listening to rap since we got Sky when I was about 10 years old, and I was just onto Yo MTV Rap straight away. My sisters were big fans of rap, and I loved everything Onyx, Far Side, all Eazy-E and stuff like that. Classics during that era were my favorites. I was just loved it. So I like talking with these guys, and I always try to have a discussion with every single person who came in, whether they were working for the BBC or whether they were just normal people. I'm just a talkative people, as you can tell by here. I'm talking away, and I met a lot of these people. So in the Hilton, I met Tim Westwood on 3 occasions. And he was an arsehole, but the people he came with were really sinister, nasty pieces of work. And the first night he stayed, they stole plenty of cars, a load of Yardie gangsters who came with him and who were hanging around with him the entire time. Stole a load of cars from the Hilton car park. They actually drugged me and another guy called Ollie. I won't say his last name, but he knows who he is. And one day Ollie probably will speak about this a little bit. Yeah, that happened. Went into a room. It was on the 3rd floor. I think it was like 319, if I remember. They had like 3 rooms. We had watched them from above in the balcony, these Yardie gangsters, and they were swapping in and out of each other's rooms. And Tim Westwood was playing in City Centre, so it didn't make any sense why they were still there. They were supposed to be at the club night. Yeah, they were there swapping between rooms. And I remember calling a woman called Jean, who was the assistant night manager at the time, and I called her on the radio, and I said, "Oh, Jean, some activity going on up here. They've got like open balconies in the Hilton Cardiff, so you can look over the top." And we were on the 5th floor, me and Ollie, and we were looking down at the 3rd floor, them moving in between rooms, between each other's rooms, and we were like, "Oh, these guys, what are they up to?" And so we called them. I called up the assistant night manager, and she was like, "Fuck off! I'm having a fag." So fuck you then. So by the time we got down, we were doing like a floor check. You do floor walks every couple of hours in hotels and nights to make sure not everything's on fire and there's not problems, because you find people lying across the floor, people's rooms open, trays, breakfast trays. That's why Ollie was with me. He was picking up the breakfast trays and taking the breakfast cards that for the room service in the morning. And we looked over and we saw this stuff, contacted her. By the time we got down to the 3rd floor, it smelled really heavily of weed, like really heavily. And me and Ollie were big smokers. We had gone to Amsterdam together as well. He was the first person I went to Amsterdam with, Ollie, and we were just naughty. We had a naughty old time. It was a good old time. And we were constantly smoking. We were constantly looking for drugs. We wanted drugs all the time. We just like, and in work we could do it. We'd go up to the roof of the Hilton. You had like this roof bit, you could look over this swim pool and you could see over the city, and we used to play pitch and toss, where you try and get the coin close to the wall, and smoke weed up top of the roof, and we'd look over the city and just be silly and what we call Mitch off work, slack off, hide away where the managers ain't gonna find you. And there were no cameras up in that area on the roof, so me and people like Giuliano and stuff, we used to go up there and be naughty and do naughty stuff. Like I say, pitch and toss mainly. I'd lose all my tips to Giuliano's amazing wrist being able to get those coins up against the wall. But we'd smoke weed and we'd when we weren't in work, we'd do heavier drugs, of course. Do a bit of coke here and there, a bit of speed. We were young. It was the late 90s, early noughties. These times were mad, but also it's fun. It's fun to live life to the full and try this and try that. And so we were naughty boys. So we got down to the 3rd floor on that night when Tim Westwood was staying, and there was a group of Yardie gangsters coming out, and there was this one. His name was Taz. We discovered going backwards and forwards in the room, and as he came out, I was like, "Oh, it smells like some good chiba," like trying to get contact. Maybe they'll give us a little toke of their stuff. And he looked at me and he was like, "You want to come in and have a smoke?" And like, he said it in a Jamaican accent, but I don't really want to do that. Fuck it, here we go. You want to come in and have a smoke, man? He said something along those lines. So me and Ollie, I looked at Ollie, and Ollie was like, and I was like, and he was like, And before you knew it, we were inside. They were watching US Marshals on the TV. I remember that quite well. Me and Ollie leaned up against the radiator. He was closest to the TV, and there was like 5, 6 yardy gangsters sitting around smoking blunts in the room. Big, massive ones, like what I got here, but like really enormous ones. And we thought they were just blunts. I mean, who knew? Who knew? You just have a smoke of this and have a smoke of that, and someone's put something in it too. I mean, what can you do? And that's exactly what happened. They rolled up. He was rolling up something special, and we were having a talk, and we weren't watching what he was putting in there. And me and Ollie were like, it was a really busy night as well. It was like a Saturday night or Friday night. It's like rocking. You're constantly going in a 5-star hotel, and it was probably about 2 o'clock in the morning, and yeah, we took this. Eventually, this big spliff came to us. This big blunt. And we each had about 3 really big puffs, like we like, let's get the most out of this quickly and then get out of here, because otherwise if we get caught we're in trouble and we're gonna stink of weed if we hang around in here all the time. So we had a good few puffs each, and we thanked these guys and we left, and it was like as soon as the door slammed behind us, we were like, what the fuck is this? It took like it was just, we just walked out and I just remember the door slamming behind. I mean, like, oh my god. And then we were floating. We were like just floating down the corridor. And my best bet now, from trying loads of different drugs over the years and other stuff, is that it was PCP, that they'd put angel dust in the spliff. And if not, it could have been something like crack, which was regularly on the streets. Whatever, the effect it had was fucking mental. We were floating down the corridor, and then we started bucking like chickens, cluck 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 cluck, bark 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 bark, and then we were slapping each other over the face. Standing in the corridor of a 5-star hotel, slapping each other over the face. The uniforms looked like Captain Scarlet uniforms as well. So I mean, it was a special German designer came in to design the uniforms, and people looked mental in there. So I looked like Captain Scarlet slapping across a room service boy who slapped me back, and we just were clucking like chickens for, I don't know, it was a long time. Eventually we got down to the bottom of the stairs, and we were still clucking like chickens, and we were still slapping each other across the face. And we went to the toilet on the ground floor to try and like sober up, because we knew we were in trouble. And we're like, once we finally stopped slapping each other across the face and clucking like chickens, which we did for quite a while, we went down to the back ramp. There's a back ramp that leads onto the Friary. And went up to the top of there, and we were going to just have a cigarette, and then this guy came wandering down the street. He's a really tall black guy, and he was dressed, and he really noticeable because he was dressed in a completely white, like really clean white tracksuit, white shoes, white hat on, like walking towards us. He was really tall, like must have been about 6'7", 6'8", and we were like, oh shit, what's this? Like, we were so high. And he got to us. He was like, all right, boys, where's the Hilton car park? And like, the Hilton car park is valet parking. Someone parks your car for you. You go up to reception. So there's no telling people where the Hilton car park. People don't park their own cars in the Hilton car park back then. But they were just using an NCP car park. The Hilton were just using a local NCP. They'd hired out a floor at the bottom and come to a deal with them. So they were just using that. And so oh my god. So he said that. I looked at Ollie to say, you probably shouldn't tell him. And Ollie went, oh, well, it's just around the corner, just right by there, and thing, and you'll see it, no problem. You get this one down underneath. And I was like, oh god. And I said something along the lines, I think I might have said just before Ollie gave directions, like something along the lines of, oh, do you know the guy, you with the guys who were staying here? And he was like, Taz. And I was like, What? We were just in the room smoking with Taz. Are you kidding? And he was like, no, 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 Taz is my mate. And then this guy handed us a spliff, and we hadn't learned our lesson at all. So the spliff he was smoking, we had a little smoke up. It was a normal spliff. There was no PCP or crack in that one by the looks of things, because we were crazy. And then he went away, and then the car came up really suspiciously, went down the front. We ran to the front of the hotel through 2 different ways and stopped this guy getting in the lift with these 2 girls. It was all really suspicious stuff. There were all these big black guys everywhere, and they were all doing. And then the Tim Westwood crew got back from the club. We were downstairs, me and Ollie, trying to have some food and trying to sober up still. And we got calls over the radio, like panic calls, and we got upstairs, and it had been the opening of the Millennium Stadium. So when I walked in the front door, because Ollie went up the one way, I went up the other, and I came around, went through the front doors of the Hilton Cardiff. And there's 3 guys holding bits of turf from the stadium that had just been opened, the Millennium Stadium, like the first day turf, and they were like, drunk, and being like, I need bags for it, and there was dirt all over the floor. There was like 3 French rugby players who were part of the French team who had got really drunk after winning that day, and were rocking each other on the porter trolley and singing Jonty Alouette, and I really mean they were doing that. That's what they were doing. And then there was this crowd right in the centre of the foyer, and it's only a small little foyer. There's a couple of security who were trying to block off the main area, so this crowd didn't go. It was a crowd of maybe 30 odd, mainly black people, apart from Tim Westwood. It was all black people, apart from Tim Westwood in the centre. And it was all these. It's really noticeable because Tim Westwood's like 6'8" or some stuff like that. So all these black people are surrounding him, and a load of the girls were really small and young, so they were like underneath him, looking really panicked. And he was shouting at everybody when they come through the door, and he was going, "You're racist, and you're racist, and you're racist." And he pointed at me, and he was like, "You're racist." Now, I've had issues in my life about racism. I got someone in my family who's black, and it's really complicated. And my family can't talk about these things openly. I know I've not known members of my family because they are of another race. I find it terrible. I'm horrified by that. All my friends throughout life have been whatever color my friends come in, but I'd been brought up with black people. My first friend was a kid called Obi, and I couldn't understand what the difference between black and white was. I just never understood. So I always grew up with this thing being like, no, I'm so super not racist, because I always like judge everybody by who they are. I used to go around and stay around all my friends' houses, and I used to see it was a different culture, and we used to have different things, and it was all a bit different. But I'd be like, oh, this is interesting, hanging around with a Pakistani family. You're eating Pakistani breakfasts, and you're doing Pakistani things. It's very interesting. And they were nice as well. I mean, I knew some really nice people. My school was a very strange school. My primary school was very mixed, and there's a large Indian and Pakistani population and Bangladeshi population in Cardiff. So I felt really like, I was like, fuck you to him. Literally said that to him as he said it. And he looked at me a little bit funny, and he kept saying, "You're racist, and you're racist." And he was railing because he wanted to take all of these people up to his room. So they had like 2 rooms, and they wanted to take 30 people up to the rooms and party in a 5-star hotel. Now, can you imagine how good that's going to be on the night? So we weren't going to let him up. The night manager ended up letting up probably about, she was a fucking idiot, but letting up about I don't know, it must have been about 10 or 15 of them, like, not all of them, but the guests who were staying, and then 10 on top, so it ended up being about 15. And there were quietish parties going on in the rooms, and young girls in the room. They look young, but by that point, I'm high anyway. I'm also not working out what's going on. And then the cars get stolen by a group of 10 yardy gangsters who, while we were being drugged up in the room and smoking, they were taking the keys out of the porter's closet, which the Hilton hadn't fitted a lock to. You could just walk in. There was these shoe boxes full of car keys in envelopes with descriptions of exactly what the car, Porsche 911, Mercedes, so and so, all of the big cars. We had Ferraris stay there and stuff. Me and a guy called Gary went spinning around in a Ferrari one time, in another illegal escapade we went on in the Hilton. I went on a few illegal escapades in the Hilton. It was crazy times. But yeah, there was this. So the cars got stolen, and then the police come and all of this, and it was like explaining to people what was going on, having to give statements and stuff, sobering up, having to give statements and leaving out the little bits where we got really high and stuff like that. So we had that experience with Tim Westwood, and I was like, "What an arsehole! I don't want to meet him again." And the Hilton told the BBC, "No, we're banning you from having Tim Westwood stay with us. He's not allowed." He stayed another 2 times. The second time he stayed was much more sinister. The 3rd time was less sinister. It was just like mainly a stay, and there was loads of other things. But by that time, it was obvious he had pressure, and he looked a bit more intimidated and scared. I think he had been shot. He had been involved in a drive-by at some point, probably because he had molested someone's younger sister or some shit like that, and basically got shot a fair few times and survived. So he could get nervous at times, I think. And the 3rd time he was apologetic for the 2nd time, but I think he knew the 2nd time. He stayed with a guy called DJ Goldfinger the 2nd time, and they were in this room together. And the 2nd time I walked in, and Tim Westwood. I was walked in for my shift. It was 11 o'clock, so it had been about 10 to 11 when I walked in. And Tim Westwood and DJ Goldfinger were at the desk. There was no crowds of people around them. They had the bags with them. And he had got BBC to give them a different name, a fake name, so that he could get into the hotel. But when they turned up, of course, people knew who he was, so who knew who they were. So there was a little bit of a backwards and forwards, a polite backwards and forwards happening at the desk. The guy who was managing the hotel, the duty manager, was a guy called Brian Byrne, who was an alcoholic, a terrible alcoholic, and he was basically unable to resist Tim Westwood's explanations for things, and agreed that as long as he didn't bring loads of people back, and it only brought back a few people, then they could stay. Of course, that was Brian Byrne. He collapsed twice of alcohol poisoning on shift at the Hilton. That's how much of a state he was. And so I found out about this when they left nearly straight afterwards for the club, and we were promised it wasn't going to be the same this time and stuff like that. But it was different. It was different in a more sinister way, because it was a guy called Barry, I think, a guy who I lived with afterwards, later became a heroin addict. He was on room service, and we were walking down. I think it was the 3rd floor, and in the distance we saw where Tim Westwood was staying, and there was a load of girls. This was after the club had closed, so it would have been about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and we hadn't, we hadn't had any of the Yardie gangsters or the drug, anything like that. It'd been a normal, quiet night, so everything had just gone as a shift would normally. Not every day was a party day in the Hilton. Not every day we were being drunk. You're just doing your job normally, and I was doing my job normally. And yeah, we came down, and there were like a queue of 10 girls outside the bedroom. And the girls all look between the ages of 14 and 17. I'd be surprised if any of those girls were 18. And they had all been selected one by one in the club and brought back for Tim Westwood and DJ Goldfinger. And they were selecting the youngest looking. And in Cardiff back then, the doormen were one of the doormen who worked in the Hilton, Paul Lee, and you can check this up, strangled a woman to death after she gave him some horrible comment in bed. Some of the doormen were terrible. They just let in any young girl because they wanted an opportunity to do some terrible thing. There were some terrible guys working on the doors in Cardiff back then, really terrible. Some of them were soul crew, like old time soul crew Cardiff City guys. So there was a lot of craziness. And so I don't know how they got past all the people downstairs. Like I say, at this point, I was still a night porter, so I had no say over all of this. And I reported this. There's no doubt I reported this. You report everything that you see that's not normal. But there was something else about it. I knew one of the girls. I knew she was 17. I'm 100% she was at the most 17. Maybe she was 16. I'd met her a few years before. I was about 16. I was about 16 and she was about 14. And we had met over Heath Park. 3 of my mates had met 3 of their mates. 3 girls, 3 boys. I was a skater and very good at chatting up girls, and they were girls who were hanging around looking to be chatted up. And we had a couple of times where we met and kissed a little bit, and then it was like they're just boring and a bit too young for us. And nothing ever happened, so we just dwindled off. And she saw me, and we hadn't seen each other for a couple of years. So I was 19 at this point, so she would have been 17, I would think. And I was like, "Oh, how's it going?" I think I remember her name, but I don't really want to say it because it's up to her to come forward, and she will eventually. I think most of these girls will realize that same things happen to them that happened to many other victims and many other these scandalous BBC moments. But she was outside. She was possibly like second or third back from last in the queue of these 10 odd girls, and nearly all of them were black, and this girl was white. And I said to her, "Hey, what's going on?" My mate Barry was hanging on the side. Like, I was like, "How's it been?" She's like, "Oh yeah, it's really good. It's really good. I'm here to meet Tim." And I said, I really did look at her like that. I was like, you know, this isn't very good. There's nothing good in there. She was like, "I know, I know. I just want to meet Tim." And I said, "Yeah, you know though, there's nothing in there for you." And she was like, "Yeah, I just want to meet Tim." And like, I'm like 2 years older than this girl. I can't tell her what to do in life. And I'm not going to have them all removed because I don't know what's going on, why these girls are here. They've got past security, management, all of this, and gone up to... So I don't understand what the situation is. I'm just doing a floor check and looking for things that I report to the night manager when I go downstairs. And so I said, all right. I gave her a hug. We had a little hug, and I was like, keep safe. And I walked past these girls one by one, and I looked at them slowly, and they looked like really like nervous. They knew they shouldn't be there. They knew that something was wrong. And I looked in the room, and DJ Goldfinger and Tim Westwood were in their boxer shorts, and they were jumping around. Well, DJ Goldfinger wasn't big boy. He was just lying there like on the first. It was in a twin bedded room. He was lying there on the first bed, and Tim Westwood was jumping around literally like a 4 or 5 year old, jumping around on the bed like he was a 4 or 5 year old in his boxers, waiting to call in the first girl. So that's like 3 o'clock in the morning. This BBC DJ got a line of very young looking girls. He does this regularly. For me, later on, I realized, man, he was every night he was at a different club in the country. He was doing this over and over again. The followers he would gain who would help him enact this were not just gangsters, because the interns and the people who were employed to help him were employed by the BBC. And the BBC employed these interns. So there's a lot of that. And we'll go into that later. Now, I've told you the story. I reported my bits, and in the third time he stayed, it was inconsequential. Like I say, he was nervous. And I said my bits about this before. I've talked about this on a couple of podcasts, and I told that story inside this article, and I think it's probably a good idea if we start with a bit of a screen share. Who knows what you'll see when I share this screen? You will see nothing apart from me. Look, I'm here. Let's make this a little bit bigger, shall we? Ooh, how exciting. There you go. And so, let's do it. Let's do it, shall we? This on johnnyvedmore.com is the Tim Westwood experience. This is the Tim Westwood experience, and this is basically the story I just told you there. So I felt like it was best to tell you. It's great. Yeah, becoming a 5-star teenage pimp. Johnny Vedmore, who do you think you are, you twat? Yeah, but it was true enough. In the Hilton, the first day, the interview, the first moment I walked in there, I'm in Capitol Towers, floor 13, looking across Cardiff. Brian Byrne, the alcoholic guy I talked about earlier, walks in to interview me. And I'm nervous as hell. It's my first proper job interview after dropping out of college. Thought I'm never going to get this job. And he sat me down. The first question he asked me was, "What do you do if a guest wants a prostitute?" And I said, "Send him to a red light district." And he said, "No." And he taught me through how you get a prostitute, where you get them from, what type of thing, what you do, what the interaction, what the process is. The first question of the interview for the Hilton. That was the first question. So I mean, it was wild days, and I was until the Ferrari F355 incident, which I think probably cost the hotel quite a bit of money. We were getting girls via the local massage parlors and the escort agencies that were supplied to us by our bosses in the Hilton. They were all over the age of 18. I met between my time working in the Hilton and in a little bit in the Holiday Inn afterwards, I met and talked with a lot of prostitutes who would come in to see men in the hotel, and they have to get past reception. And in the Hilton, we were calling them. So we were greeting them, taking them up. We were explaining the deal. We'd be up checking later, and then we'd be escorting them down. I'd be giving them a drink at the end of it and a little conversation, and we get to know each other a little bit. So you know who they are. So you know, do you want to bring this one back for one of your best guests in the future or for another person? And that's what they teach you. They teach you to be a pimp in the Hilton. That's what they taught me, and so that's what how I form that belief that that's what they want to do. Okay, so I had all of this experience with Tim Westwood. I mentioned it out loud, and what came next was intriguing. It was a year and a half, maybe later, before Ruth Evans of the BBC contacted me, and in between, another one of the BBC girls contacted me, a young lady who wanted to know about Tim Westwood and my experience from what I'd said. So she was obviously vetting me and seeing what I'd say, and I was very honest with her. I said, all of this happened, and I told her the story I just told you there. But there's no way on earth that I'm willing to work with the BBC, who I think will try and cover up for their own DJ. And she said, "Okay, I understand your concerns from all of the history of recent history with Jimmy Savile, etc. That's understandable that your thoughts that way. We may contact you again if you'd be a bit quiet about this. We're making a documentary. We're trying to make a documentary." So I said, "All right. I'll wait to see what they do." And months passed by, and there wasn't any sign. So I talked with a couple of people about my experience in hotels in general, and I realized that this was going to have to happen eventually. I was going to have to just note down what my experience was, and maybe I should do it earlier rather than later, seeing as I get a feeling their main problem is that people are not coming forward because no one knows, because they're being really careful to approach people really carefully who have said something out loud about Tim Westwood. Now, if you're stuck in a cycle of abuse with a load of gang members, are you going to turn around and say out loud, I'm stuck in a cycle of abuse with a load of gang members because of this guy who works for the BBC? Don't think so. Don't think that's happening. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for people who would be outspoken about and saying. So they're looking already for not reporting on some things and accepting they're only reporting on other things. That is a narrow investigation then, isn't it? Because what they're saying is, I'm going to look for people who have already spoken out and not introduce new victims into it. So they had to be at somewhat public at some point. And I got a feeling that that was coming, and that start about a year ago. I can't remember quite when. I started getting a couple of emails from Ruth Evans, who was heading this investigation, or seemed to be heading this investigation, and the making of some documentaries, and these were really weak documentaries that went out with a. It's like they're over the top worried about people saying what is obviously going to be said. Another BBC DJ who raped girls. That's what is going to be said. That's what they fear. That's what's going to be said. Whether it's me saying it or someone else saying it, that is what is going to be said. They fear that coming. So they've been trying to hide, and they've been trying to obfuscate, and they've been trying to do other things to narrow down the investigation, to keep it all quite as quiet as possible for as long as possible. And they'll give you loads of excuses. I mean, if you were out there, they give you loads of excuses why they have to be quiet and why they have to be careful, and people are scared and they won't speak. But they won't speak, and they're scared because they see that the BBC are even scared about speaking. So they're not going to speak to people who are scared about speaking, are they? Who aren't going to really tell their story, who are just going to leave them in the lurch at the end of it. And that's what a lot of victims of people like this, they're in fear. Eventually, the people who Tim Westwood hung around will no longer have this type of fear attached to them and the type of power they once did. And all of this will come crumbling down. And the BBC wanted to be there with a controlled demolition for this. They wanted to be there to slowly start being, that they could say, oh, look, we were trying to expose it really early on, but it's not really early on. It's 20 years too late, over 20 years too late. What I saw was over 20 years ago, and he continued to do that for BBC, through BBC Radio and through Capital Radio, and BBC were employing people for him who would then be abused and the like. That's pretty serious. And there he is. For the Guardian picture, of course, they did. This is Alexandra Topping. Now, we're going to get to a conference soon. That was, as you see, this was reported in July 2022, and it was also a conference in the Center for Journalism, for Investigative Journalism, who they're famous, a bit of a famous organization, but the main people surrounding who were trying to control this case were all involved in this Center for Investigative Journalism talk about Tim Westwood specifically. And the Guardian and the BBC around the same time, this is just after the BBC's revelations, I think, would at the same time release a couple of really carefully worded articles that weren't too much, that wouldn't scare people too much, and would start the ball rolling, but wouldn't expose anything major. And a lot of this is within the headline. Think about this, and everybody knows it. Most people read the headline, subtitle, and then they go, yeah. Think about these in relation to all these stories. They've been carefully worded for the least impact possible in an article that should have the most impact possible. So as an investigative journalist myself, I know you want to get as much information as possible. You put it all together and you put it into a way that people can digest properly so they can understand how serious something is. And in this situation, that should be pretty easy, but not for them. They make it very hard. And this Guardian piece we'll go through a bit later. I wanted to start off on this so I could explain a couple of things, though. You know, they already started. He always did those like, oh, look at me, I'm tough, I'm an hard man. Hey, he wasn't a very handsome guy, not a very nice guy. I don't understand how he managed to get away from it with it for so long. It's very much like Jimmy Savile. He reminds me very much in the way he uses power and he controls people of Jimmy Savile. He uses tricks. Anyway, Tim Westwood faced bullying allegation inside BBC while Radio 1 DJ. So this is the Guardian trying to say, look, while the worst thing the BBC did was not properly investigate bullying while Tim Westwood was a Radio 1 DJ. That's what that title says. It says the Guardian is saying Tim Westwood was bullying people while he was he was doing a lot worse, wasn't he? He was doing a lot worse. But this is how to suffocate the lot worse. So I'm going to pull this one along a bit. I'm going to pull this one down a bit. Ooh, that's exciting. Maybe a bit to the back. We'll see. And we're going to look at that article in a bit. But I'm going to go to the Center for Investigative Journalism site. Now, there is only one capture of this page. Oh, hi. The picture didn't come up yesterday. How wonderful. So here we go. I'm wondering if that's the first girl I spoke to. But that lady I spoke to, she called me. She emailed me and asked me to call her. So I talked to her on the phone for about, I don't know, it must have been about an hour and a half, 2 hours. I had, what was really peculiar when I was talking to her is I was telling the story. I wanted, to be able to understand what they were doing, I had to talk. And to get someone to open up, you have to be willing to speak. So I'm willing. I happily spoke about the same thing I spoke about before, but also about my feelings about the case. And the fact that my mistrust for the BBC. I was really honest about that. So I think she realized, and she asked if she wanted me. And at first I was like, okay, I might work with them. That's what my first thought was when I left the conversation with Ruth Evans. She was a nice girl, but I thought about it and was just like, oh, God, how silly. Work for go and help the beast. And no doubt they're going to be doing a cover-up, no doubt. And what I've seen looks like that. They're trying to dull it down. What they do here is they choose 4 women. And they choose them from certain backgrounds, of course. But the main people heading it up over here, Ruth Evans and Alexandra Topping, and they've got 2 black assistants here too, including Chichi Uzundu, who works for the BBC, and this is Guardian's community affairs correspondent. So low-level Guardian, high-level Guardian, low-level BBC, high-level BBC. And this is the Center for Investigative Journalism. And they did this investigating media celebrity Tim Westwood. And when was this? This was, unfortunately, I haven't got it on the archive, but this is about June 2022. So, like I said, with the Guardian article, it was released July. So they talk about it. We'll get to that. They talk about it 13th of July, 4th of July. They talk about the subject just the month before, about the hardship. But look at this. Let's get these on. Let's get into NEWSHOUND properly. Investigating media celebrity Tim Westwood. How do journalists go about investigating misconduct among media celebrities with many fans and who might work for the same employers? So how do BBC investigate themselves? That's what it's saying straight away. Earlier this year, a joint investigation by reporters at the BBC and Guardian uncovered allegations of sexual misconduct by DJ Tim Westwood. All 4 reporters involved come to CIJ to discuss how their investigation began. Please note, Chatham House rules apply. Now, for anybody who is on the independent media and who looks at the establishment, the elite, the Rhodesian roots of it, and I mean that by Cecil Rhodes and the like, and Chatham House and CFR, you may say, Chatham House rules? What are Chatham House rules? And why do they apply in this situation? I don't understand. That's what you may say. And that's what it says at the beginning. We'll go through this. I'm going to go simply to probably to the Wikipedia page. Let me just close one of these so I can see what's behind here. Because it's worth noting what Chatham House rules are. Very worth noting. So these are the guys who are behind, like I say. So let's meet them. Amna Modine. Amna Modine is the Guardian's community affairs correspondent, where she covers race and inequality. Alexandra Topping. Alexandra Topping is a senior national news reporter at The Guardian. For more than a decade, she has reported on violence against women and girls, as well as wider societal issues related to sex and gender, such as childcare, shared parenting, and workplace and economic inequality. Chichi Azundu. Chichi Azundu started her journalistic career at the age of 17 as a regular columnist for Girls About Town magazine. This is you'll find out with Chichi Azundu, this is a copy and paste profile for sure. A few years later, she joined BBC London 94.9 as a researcher before graduating to become a producer, working on Saturday sports show, the John Gaunt Show, Drive, Vanessa Feltz, and other programs, very much other programs. We'll have a look at that later. Ruth Evans started her career on File on 4, exposing a kidney trafficking gang in Pakistan and abuse of children at Aston Hall Psychiatric Hospital. Very interested to look into that more. She has made several investigative documentaries for BBC Three, including False Hope, Alternative Cancer Cures, and Under the Skin, The Botched Beauty Business. Well, these girls are set up to control demolition, BBC's involvement with Tim Westwood. It's these girls, that's what I say. And of course, in their first conference about it, they're going to have Chatham House rules applying. Okay, well, here we go. So, Chichi Azundu is an award-winning radio journalist that is in London, United Kingdom. She's a news and entertainment reporter at BBC News, yes. Azundu attended Maria Fidelis Convent School. Pretty strict. She went on to attend City of London, graduated 2003 in broadcast journalism, blah, 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 blah. In teacher, started her career in 1997 as a columnist for Good. Yeah, we know. During her time writing, she's also freelance for Cosmopolitan, BBC Radio Manchester. Azundu became broadcast assistant for BBC London 94.9 in 2001, April 2001. No doubt she would have been around Tim Westwood. No doubt at all. She took part in assisting the shows among the likes of the John Gaunt Show, the Saturday Sports Show, and the Vanessa Feltz Show. She became a producer for a radio station in July 2002. From 2002 to 2005, Azundu was a freelance reporter for several publishers, including Sky News, ITN, and Virgin Radio. She reported on several events, including crime, entertainment, and showbiz. She also freelanced at Sky News and worked on ITN before returning to BBC as a reporter for BBC Radio 1 Extra. BBC 2005 to present. Azundu first joined BBC News in September 2005. While she worked for Radio 1 Extra, she presented 2-hour news magazine show TXU and was the entertainment presenter on the Trevor Nelson Breakfast Show. She then joined the BBC Radio 1's Newsbeat Entertainment news team, breaking a number of big stories, including doing a weekly expose on the ticketing industry, which contributed to Newsbeat winning a Sony Gold Award. Oh, Sony giving an award to A mainstream journalist. How wonderful. In 2014, she became one of BBC Three's 60-second news presenters who present the news on BBC Three's television nightly. Later she appeared as a reporter on the BBC's Victoria Derbyshire show. As well as breaking the controversial risk assessment form 696, she also exposed the connection between grime music and gang violence in the UK, how Robbie Williams' management were charging fans higher price for tickets on resale sites, despite signing public notice against them historically. She has also worked for BBC's news gathering team, performing as a correspondent on a variety of stories of flagship news programmes, the 6 and 10 o'clock evening news, including travelling to Jamaica to cover the Windrush scandal, how Xanax was being used by children as young as 11, plus the Mercury Prize winners. Indian Spring book. In 2012, Chichi Azundu began writing a women's fiction novel called Indian Spring, a story about a woman named Karen Whelan who meets a man named Matt online. Don't tell me it ends badly. Yes, and here you go. This is Chichi Azundu. And she, video not available. People getting rid of their Chichi Azundu videos. Oh, look, this one's good. Look, this one's titled Hilarious Picture of Chichi Azundu. Ho, ho, ho. So funny. And so she's there with, like, whatever stars are around the place that she's met at the BBC. I'm not sure who that is, but... yes. Anyway, so that is Chichi Azundu. And she is one of the people involved in this. As you see down here, there she is, Chichi Azundu, as part of this thing that has Chatham House rules applying. Well, here's the... yeah, this is better. There you go. There you go. This is what I was looking for. So again, you see it's copy and paste, but this is her profile on the Center for Investigative Journalism, which some of them have their profile up and some of them don't, as you always can tell with these things. Well, so Alexandra Topping, a senior national news reporter at Guardian for more than a decade, has reported on violence against women and girls, as well as the wider societal issues related to sex and gender. Blah, 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 blah. FGM, campaign to end FGM. What about campaign to end mutilation of kids who suddenly identified as transgender? How about that, Alexandra? Would you like to stop that? Probably not. Amna Modine, not much about her. Be interesting to have a proper look into her, I would suppose. And Chichi Azundu was there. She was there. And there's her, of course, she's on Blonde Afro. And you see a pinned tweet is this article that we're going to go through later on. And that may be her pinned tweet, may get her some benefits here and there, but do we see her chasing the story down? Doesn't look like it too much. So anyway, talking about Gary Lineker, they can't help themselves, can they? They cannot help themselves. So Chatham House rules. Under the Chatham House rule, anyone who comes to a meeting is free to use the information from the discussion, but is not allowed to reveal who made any particular comment. That's it. The Chatham House rules apply. You can come to this conference where we're going to have these public speakers. You can report on what they say, but you're not allowed to tell anybody what person said what. So, reporting restrictions on freedom of the press from the BBC and Guardian while they're trying to control a story from getting out of control. Now, I didn't know about Chatham House rules properly until I feel like I got told it before. It is designed to increase openness of discussion. Yeah, it's designed to hide who says what. The rule is a system for holding debates and discussion panels on controversial topics, named after the headquarters of the UK Royal Institute of International Affairs, based in Chatham House, London, where the rule originated in June 1927. Yes, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which is a Rhodesian society, and is heavily related, in fact, to the Council on Foreign Relations and other things, and is accused by many people of being one of the few organizations that control the world. And they put in restrictions to the press, and the press abide by them. So are they in line with Chatham House? Yes. The BBC? Yes. Guardian? Yes. Chatham House rules apply. Why not? Because we don't want to be sued by Tim Westwood. What, for saying things that are honest and you've already investigated and you believe? Say what you believe. For God's sake, this is why everybody hates the mainstream media, because they're not saying what they bloody believe. The rule was created in 1927 and refined in 1992. Since its most recent refinement in 2002, the rule states, when a meeting, a part thereof, is held under Chatham House Rule, participants are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speakers nor that of any other participant may be revealed. Sometimes a reference is made to Chatham House rules. However, Chatham House states that a singular should be used as there is only one rule. The rule is designed to promote openness and discussion of public policy and current affairs. It allows people to express and discuss controversial opinions and arguments without suffering the risk of stalling their career or even dismissal from the job, and with clear separation from the opinion and view of their employer. So it allows them, they're saying it allows them to separate their views from their employers. Oh, it's not the BBC saying that. Who do you work for? The BBC. Well, all I know is that you're saying that, and surely it's you. No, you don't know. It could be the Guardian who was saying that. Oh, it could be. What the BBC done? I know, helped to fund, promote, and to put out a rapist. Oh, really? Okay, I can see why you wouldn't want to speak about that. The rule allows people to speak as individuals, and to express views that may not be of their organizations. That's what they say. It's very interesting. European Central Bank uses it as well. See also journalism sourcing, whistleblower, and sub-rows. So they try and put it like, oh, you're a whistleblower. You want the news out. We want you to get the news out. So why don't you say it? But Chatham House rules apply. And so do you trust these guys who go and have a discussion about Tim Westwood just before they're putting out the articles, and they're all using Chatham House rules so no one knows who said what and why they said it, so that they can be disconnected from the BBC, who they represent, who employed this guy, who promoted him, and who are now trying to cover up and make it as little out of it as possible. They're trying to suffocate it as best they can. They know it has to come out. They're doing it much different than they did with Savile, aren't they? Where they denied it and they acted like nothing was going on. Now they've learned their lesson. Now they've got to cover it up and hide it and suffocate it, because otherwise people will find out it's hundreds of people. All of these people. Now, in looking at this, all these people are going to be really, really the ones who covered it up once you see how many people have been affected by Tim Westwood. You'll be like, how the hell? What? And these people just went after, like, 6 unidentified girls or whatever, or said about 6. It's terrible. And so here you go. If you bother the BBC for long enough, if you go on Twitter and say out loud what one of their staff has been doing, if you're honest and get the news out there, eventually you do force their hand. So this is 3 years after, I think about 3 years roughly to the month after I made the first my first mention of Westwood on tweets, and other people did the same, and now it's forced them to have to look at it. And that's disgusting. The fact that these 4 people could try and take any kudos for the fact that it's been suffocated for so long. Better late than never, but really bad that it was this late at all. So let's read through this. Let's read. There he is, Tim Westwood, looking older now, isn't he? Hey, you're in so much trouble, Sunshine. So much trouble. Tim Westwood, BBC reveals complaints against DJ. By Chichi Azunda and Ruth Evans. The BBC has revealed that a complaint against former Radio 1 DJ Tim Westwood had previously been referred to police. So they're saying straight away, the first thing they're doing is saying, the BBC revealed a complaint against former Radio 1 DJ Tim Westwood, previously been referred to the police. We said to the police, we reported it to the police. That's what they're saying. Hey, there's something happening. We reported it to the police. Nice first statement. The complaint is one of 6 the corporation now says it received about alleged bullying or sexual misconduct by Westwood. I call bullshit. It's one of the 6 that the corporation now says it received. And they'll say something different later on. I bet. Don't believe them. Don't believe them. There is so many more than 6, and so many more than 6 would have complained to the BBC. Promise you. Director General Tim Davie said in April, no evidence of complaints has been found after BBC News and Guardian revealed accounts of predatory sexual behaviour by the DJ. No evidence of complaints had been found after BBC News and Guardian revealed accounts of predatory behaviour by DJ. So what? The BBC has revealed a complaint against former had previously been referred to the police, but Tim Davie there in April said no evidence of complaints had been found at the BBC. So the BBC in April, before this, already said there's no evidence of complaints. The Director General himself. Westwood denies the allegations. Well, of course he does. In relation to the police referral, a BBC spokesman said in a statement, this is a historic case that the BBC has found in its files. We are establishing the facts around it. It did not relate to the conduct at the BBC premises, or conduct towards BBC staff members, nor was it an accusation of physical assault. No. But this BBC DJ was employed by the BBC, had his staff provided by the BBC, had his hotels provided by the BBC, was funded by the BBC, but they would be playing in another place. That puts him at arm's distance, so they can say it did not relate to his conduct at the BBC premises, or conduct towards BBC staff members. Now, carefully, go back. In relation to police referral, one case that got referred, a BBC spokesman said, this is a historic case that the BBC has found in its file. We are establishing the facts around it. It did not relate to the conduct. There's one case. Of all of the cases that are going to come out, they're focusing on one case, and they're saying, look, this case didn't happen at the BBC premises, and wasn't against BBC staff. So, BBC. The BBC declined to say whether the other 5 complaints had been received before or after Mr. Davie's statement in April. So the BBC declined to say. The spokesman added that the DJ had been spoken to following one of the other complaints. And the corporation said it was not aware of what further action was taken about the complaints at the time. There he is. Tim. Here you are. Now, look. Tim Westwood was a presenter on BBC Radio 1 and Radio 1 Extra between 1994 and 2013. Radio 1 Extra. Can you remember who else? Chichi Azundu used to work a bit Radio 1 Extra. What's this? Oh, Chichi Azundu of Radio 1 Extra, who used to work in Radio 1 Extra, is reporting on this Radio 1 Extra guy. Oh, really? The complaints were revealed after BBC News challenged the corporation's response to a Freedom of Information request made in November 2021. BBC News, the hero, exposing the BBC. What? Nothing? Oh my God, you people. It's like incestuous as hell. It's like watching just incest. It's just like another form. It's a form of illicit incestuous activity. Oh, we're one of your people over there, BBC, is one of our people over here, BBC. Do you know BBC? Who's responsible, BBC? Yes, it's the BBC. No, it's not. It's the BBC. Oh, yes, of course it is. It's the BBC, but they didn't know anything about the BBC. Yes, they didn't know anything about the BBC. That's what this sounds like to me. The request was part of a joint investigation with The Guardian, which featured the account of 7 black women who alleged unexpected and unwanted sexual misconduct between 1992 and 2017. My experience of Tim Westwood was about 1999. So this is 1992, 7 years before and up to 2017. Imagine how many victims there are. Imagine. You're in 6. You're going to stop on 6. How about we stop on 6? Let's not go any further on 6. And it's a joint investigation between The Guardian and the BBC. So even the investigation itself has been undermined by the fact that the people they're supposed to be investigating are the ones, in part, helping the investigation for The Guardian. It is completely insane. It is the foxes in the chicken coop saying, "Who's eating you?" It is truly some of the most evil and malevolent way. They both of them, The Guardian and BBC, should be saying, okay, someone else has to deal with this. We've now made ourselves completely and utterly look like we are involved in a cover-up. They were featured in BBC free documentary Tim Westwood, Abuse of Power. Yeah, they made a Tim Westwood documentary, but they didn't actually. Oh, and what a nice abuse of power! But it's a BBC reporting on BBC, doing the BBC. Only 6 come out because it's the BBC who are explaining it, and people don't want to go towards the employer of the person who molested them, who raped them. They don't want to do that, do they? Some worked in the music industry and feared repercussions, with DJ having a prominent role in the industry long criticised for his treatment of darker-skinned black women. Allegations about Westwood's behaviour towards young black women had circulated on social media for some time. Westwood, 64, was a presenter on BBC Radio 1 and Radio 1 Extra between 1994 and 2013, repeating information, where he hosted the UK's first nationally broadcasted hip-hop show. Yeah, so the BBC, the first nationally broadcasted hip-hop show, go and get a white guy to present it. Yeah, that's it. A white guy who's got an inclination towards very young girls. That sounds like a prerequisite you need when you're applying for a job at the BBC, doesn't it? It sounds like something you'd already need to do. They are disgusting, the lowest of the low. If you work for them, work with them, you are working with the devil. And that's what come to my conclusion when Ruth Evans was contacting me on multiple occasions and trying to get me to work with them. You work with the devil. For God's sake, woman. In response at the time to the documentary, a spokesperson for the DJ said he denied the allegations in their entirety. They said, our client confirms that there has never been any complaint made against him, whether officially or unofficially. I mean, that's how bold this guy is. He's bold as hell. He believes that he's going to get away with everything. Relating to claims of inappropriate behavior of the nature described. No complaint has ever been made to the police, and nobody has ever raised these matters or any colorably similar with him directly or with his representatives. There has been no investigation in relation to him of any nature whatsoever, whether by the police, his employer, or indeed any other authority. And that says everything about the BBC, about the police, and about every other authority, including child protection authorities, who I no doubt you will discover that child protection was called in on 1 or 2 of these cases. No doubt you'll discover that there's a load of evidence all around the place, but they're purposely not lifting up that evidence. The BBC are investigating themselves, and they're finding that they themselves are telling themselves no comment. What world are we living in? So anybody who thinks that this is a solved case or that the BBC are doing a good job because at least someone's doing something about it, fuck you. What is in your brain? Do not trust these malevolent pedo hoarders. That's what they are. They're pedo hoarders. They keep finding them. They keep finding they've been helping and paying for them to molest children, and then they try and cover up. That's what they do every time. They try and make it damage limitation, damage control. They're doing this here as well. This is obvious. There's not 6 victims to this crime. BBC, say that to me. Tell me there's more, there's less, there's just 6 victims. Tell me. It's a lie. The fact that you're saying people haven't complained, that's probably because they can see people who are complicit with the crime, who help form the crime. Right. BBC News has made several attempts to contact him for comment about complaints, and he has yet to respond. No doubt. He's like, why are they even bothering? The BBC said 6 complaints covered the years Westwood worked for the corporation and some related to conduct outside of the broadcaster. In its response to the BBC News challenge, the corporation said, "We are aware that one of these complaints was referred to the police and Westwood was spoken to in relation to another complaint." Okay, they're aware of something that they denied existed earlier. They're still doing the same thing as before. At the same time, they're trying to look like the heroes. Chichi Azunda out there exposing the BBC for the BBC, who tells the BBC that there's no comment to a BBC comment. This is idiotic. The BBC being involved in this is disgusting and just means that the police should be searching their building. They should be pulling out every information they have. It should be under investigation, proper investigation, and it's obvious crimes have been committed and they are hiding. This is hiding it. This is not getting justice for any of the victims, including the 6 who have their stories told. That's no justice at all. And if you think that's justice, you'll open up your eyes. Go wash your eyes out. We are not aware what further action was taken at this stage, and as a result of this, we are looking at what action was taken at the time. Following a joint BBC News and Guardian investigation in April, Mr. Davies said, "We looked at records and seen no evidence of complaints against the DJ. If something like this were raised or anything comes up, we investigate it fully." Oh yeah, like you have in the past. And I would hope we're doing that in that time as well. And I would hope we're doing. Oh my God. And I would hope we were doing that in that time as well. It's not an easy sentence to say. Mr. Davey, I think he's probably a graduate of English, isn't he? Yeah, still. Mr. Davey said, referring to Westwood's time at the BBC, "I would simply say if people have evidence where things weren't followed up or they have concerns in this area, bring it to us. We want to investigate it." The BBC said Mr. Davey had set out the position and he understood it at the time. As he understood it at the time, Mr. Davey was director of audio and music at the corporation, ultimately overseeing BBC Radio 1 between 2008 and 2012. Well, who was responsible before that? We take this seriously. After the FOI request was submitted in November 2021, the corporation initially responded to say it could neither confirm nor deny whether the BBC holds the requested information. The BBC investigating the BBC gets told that the BBC is not willing to confirm nor deny whether the BBC holds the requested information. Stupidity. This is stupidity personified. Someone stop these out of control. The BBC has to be taken out of public hands. It has to go private and it has to fall. It has to be broken up. It should be broken up. It is a criminal enterprise in many different ways. When the story was published, it said in the statement that they were shocked to hear of these allegations, but did not hold any information that was helpful for this investigation. Lies. They're not looking for any information for these investigations. Not looking at all. In the latest statement, the BBC said, "As we have said, if people have things they want to raise with the BBC, then they should do so. People have now done so, and we will continue to investigate. We also said that we would dig into what happened in the past. We are doing that with great care. All of that work hasn't concluded and is ongoing. We said we would take this seriously, and we are." The latest disclosure by broadcasters came after BBC News appealed to the Information Commissioner's Office, which regulates Freedom of Information Act requests in the UK. The BBC said it had volunteered the information about 6 complainants outside the scope of the Freedom of Information Act. Oh, and then they get the plug. They get the plug at the end of it. They get to plug their own documentary on it. The BBC making money off the crimes of the BBC and the denial of the BBC while investigating the BBC. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. And then only a few days later, what was it? 9 days later, DJ Tim Westwood accused of sex with 14-year-old girl. And there he is. Looking a bit sad. By Chichi Izunda and Ruth Evans again. So they had these lined up. These were the 2 articles they had to get out roughly at the same time. They're not pressurizing more than that. They're just going to put out a couple of tiny bit articles. That's all. That's all they're going to do. What's the point? DJ Tim Westwood is facing allegations from women who say that they had sex several times starting when she was 14. A woman who says they had sex several times starting when she was 14. She says Mr. Westwood was in his 30s at the time and describes him as a predator. Right. Lots of people would describe him as a paedophile. Lots of people, if this is true, lots of people would happily describe Tim Westwood as a pederast, as a paedophile who targets young girls, young black girls. Black girls are easy to take away from the community around them because a lot of the community is built upon some form of prejudice, and it means that they've had a bad life and they feel dejected from society, and you can split them further from their families, groom them, and have sex with them. That's what it sounds like Westwood's done. He's not a predator, he's a paedophile. Tim Westwood is a paedophile, if this is true. The woman is one of several who come forward after an investigation by BBC News and The Guardian with claims of misconduct and abuse dating from 1990 to 2020. Right, okay. So within 9 days, they've written a new article. And it says now that it's changed from being 1992, I think it was before, to 2017. And it's now 1990 to 2020. It's becoming wider, isn't it? It's becoming wider. Yeah, it's only been 9 days. You had more things come in 9 days. Mr. Westwood did not respond to a request for comment. It is illegal in the UK to have sex with a 14-year-old. They have to tell you that because BBC readers don't know that because, you know, they're so used to it now. In April, a number of women accused the former Radio 1 DJ of predatory and unwanted sexual behaviour and touching, not mentioned in the previous article, in incidents between 1992 and 2017. They also accused him of abusing his position in the music industry. So this article is worded a lot differently than the last article. BBC News and The Guardian have investigated the stories of 10 women who came forward after the initial revelations. Some of the women told us they had encountered Mr. Westwood when they were under 18. Warning, some of the stories contain descriptions of sexual violence and attempted suicide. That's what Tim Westwood does. Does best. One said she was only 14 when she first had sex with Mr. Westwood. Another said she was 16 when the DJ, who was in his 40s at the time, began what she says was a controlling relationship with her. Both women say their relationship affected their mental health. 2 other women say they were in their mid-teens when they were sexually assaulted by Mr. Westwood. The testimonies of these other women featured in the new BBC news documentary Hip Hop's Open Secret, Tim Westwood, which is available on BBC iPlayer now and is on BBC Free at 2200 and raises new concerns about the 64-year-old's behaviour over 3 decades. Again, promoting and plugging their documentaries, their weak documentaries that haven't done anything to open up this case. I've carefully helped BBC work out what they need to cover up so that the BBC News doesn't investigate them. BBC for the BBC. One woman who was 20 when she met the DJ at student club night says he sexually assaulted her in his hotel room by pushing his penis in her mouth while she was resisting. He previously strenuously denied the allegations of 7 women who featured in the original investigations by BBC and Guardian. In response at the time to that BBC documentary, a spokesperson for the DJ said he denied the allegations to their entirety. They said, "Our client confirms that there has never been any complaint made against him, whether official or unofficially, relating to claims of inappropriate behaviour in the nature described." After those revelations of the British hip-hop, DJ stepped down from his weekly Saturday night radio show on Capital Extra until further notice, according to statements from his parent company Global at the time. Other than 2 who are friends, none of the women we spoke to know each other or have met. All are black. What a surprise. And again, they're plugging their own documentary. BBC News, looking into the BBC. You can watch it on BBC. Oh, let's get our ratings up for the BBC. They're making the most out of it. It's disgusting how they advertise it, and they're disgusting. All but one of the women's names have been changed to protect their identity and to protect other women coming forward. Of all those who have spoken to the BBC and The Guardian, Esther was the youngest at the time. She says the DJ had sex with her. She says she was 14 and the experience later led her to attempting to take her own life. She first met him at his club nights at the Ark in Vauxhall in 1990. She and her friends were big fans of DJ's hip-hop show on Capital Radio, and they would often call the programme for a shout-out. They became regulars at his club night. Tim Westwood would always see us. He'd let us in for free, says Esther. Sometimes he'd come and check on us. You guys enjoying yourself? And that's how it started. She says the DJ knew how young she was because he had asked her age. He didn't look shocked or anything, she said. When she asked him if she could continue coming, he said, "Sure you can." I think we exchanged numbers and he just started, "Oh, are you coming tonight, so I can leave your name at the door." And then I'd say it was a couple of months after that he asked me to meet up with him at Hammersmith Station. She says the DJ met her in the West End, London, and drove her to a flat. He offered her a drink, but she said she wanted to choose. He sat and talked, and then he kissed her. I was like, okay, I don't have any problem with that. And then it progressed from there. We had sex. It would not be the only time. The DJ, she says, would call her at home after 1800 because he knew her mum worked nights, and they would arrange to meet. There is a paedophile. This is a paedophile. Another BBC paedophile. I never get consent to sex. I never gave consent to sex, but I never said no either, so I just went along with it, she says, because she's 14 years old. In the 1990s, sexual offences were prosecuted under Sexual Offences Act 1956, which said it is an offence for a man to have unlawful sexual intercourse with a girl not under the age of 13 but under the age of 16. In 2003, that was replaced by a new law under Sexual Offences Act 2003. Unlawful sexual intercourse with a child under 13 is termed rape of a child under 13. If the child is aged 13 to 15, the offence is sexual activity with a child. That's weird, isn't it? It's weird that they define. Esther, who described herself as a bit of a troubled teen, says she broke off contact with the DJ when she was 16 and realised it didn't feel right. She said, "It felt like a dirty little secret. I kind of thought it was normal, but that's because I don't understand the gravity of the situation. I didn't understand the gravity of the situation. It wasn't a relationship, and it wasn't about love. It was about just one thing, and the thing you couldn't discuss with anybody." She said it feels like the DJ had groomed her and describes Mr. Westwood as a predator and herself as prey. She didn't tell anyone, she says, because she felt that she would get the blame, not him, because I'm no one. She's right as well. That's exactly what would have happened. Esther started a new relationship not long afterwards with her then partner, and her then partner told the BBC he had been repulsed to learn that the older DJ had sexual encounters with a teenager. Lydia, another woman who came forward, was at college during the A-levels when she started going to Mr. Westwood's Caesar nightclub, Streatham, London. She said the DJ saw her one night and asked her for a number. They started a relationship. Lydia says Mr. Westwood knew she was only 16 at the time. He told her he was 27, though she later discovered he was in his 40s. She lived on her own and describes herself at the time as a vulnerable young girl. Sex was consensual, but it didn't feel like a healthy sexual relationship because he was a grown man and I was a teenager, she says. During the 18 months it lasted, he isolated her from her friends and family. She says she became depressed and tried to end her own life. A friend of Lydia's from the time remembers the impact on Lydia's mental health. Her brother also told us he recalls confronting Mr. Westwood about the situation. It was quite controlling in lots of ways, said Lydia. I had a home phone and he demanded to have the password to it, so he would often listen to my messages. If he was traveling, he would insist that she came with him. She says because he didn't trust her to be on her own. Lydia said she would sometimes go with Mr. Westwood to the BBC where he went to pick something up. He went to the BBC, taking his prey there. A BBC spokesperson said it was a standard procedure in 1997 for people working in BBC buildings to sign in guests, adding that the BBC introduced a regularly updated child protection and safeguarding policy in 2004 and a visitors policy in 2010. Wow. Years too late. A spokeswoman said, today, the BBC safeguarding arrangements have never been stronger and are regularly updated in line with best practices. Where under 18s are permitted to access the BBC's premises under our safeguarding policy, they will always be accompanied by a chaperone and never left alone. What type of chaperone? Like Tim Westwood or like an older sister who's also having the same done to her? Lydia chose to tell her story to correct what she sees as a lie. Mr. Westwood had previously said in a statement that he could categorically say he had never had an inappropriate relationship with anyone under the age of 18. This was a response to a claim made against him in 2020 on social media. He said they were fabricated, false, without foundation. I'm probably one of the few girls that he couldn't deny being with because there was quite a lot of witnesses, she said. I wish more people had stepped in. I wish adults who were around him, the bodyguards, the secretaries, the interns of the BBC, the people who I would say were bystanders. She's talking about, some of the people she's talking about is BBC staff who did not step in, who did not say anything. Two others who were under 18 have also come forward with allegations. Paige was in year 9, so 13 or 14 years old when Mr. Westwood performed at her under 18s night at the Oceana Club in Cardiff. The Oceana Club was across the road from the other hotel that I was talking about working in as well, and it was a dive. Paige, who lived in South Wales, went along. I was excited that Tim Westwood was going to be there. For me, as a kid, that was like awesome. Paige won a dance competition and was invited to the DJ booth to pick up her prize. She asked Mr. Westwood to sign her t-shirt and says he grabbed her breasts and said, "Whoa, look at these." It's difficult because I didn't necessarily see it at the time as a violation, she says, but reflecting on it now as a mother, she is angry. She added, young black women are hypersexualized from a very young age, which is partly why she didn't recognize what happened as an assault at the time. Paige's mum recalls picking her up from a club that night and says Paige told her what happened a few years later. Like Paige, 15-year-old Emma was a big fan of Westwood's music, calling him a real hip-hop head. So when she heard a call out on his BBC Radio 1 show for people to work on his street team, she saw it as the greatest opportunity. She and other teenagers would hand out flyers and work backstage at gigs. She says she first met Westwood at his office in Carnaby Street, London. At some point, she says, he asked to meet up with her. I think it was a drink or a dinner or something. She says she didn't think it was going to be anything more than that, given the age gap. Mr. Westwood was 26 years older than her. So in my head, he was like not my dad, but he was like an older guy. So just asexual to me in a way. Mr. Westwood picked her up from a London home in a large American car, but they ended up in a flat where he told her he needed to pick something up. There, they talked about music. He put hip hop on before switching to R&B. It was getting kind of slow jammy, and I was like, okay, I don't feel good about this. When he got closer, she made her excuses to leave. We're in the car. He leans in fast. And he's like, he's talking to me. She's like, yeah, I really like you. She says. He's like, I really like you, she says. And then he sticks his tongue down my throat. Emma told him she was only interested in work with him. Soon afterwards, she was dropped from the team. Sophie also worked on the street team. She told The Guardian she worked with Mr. Westwood when she was 18 and was trying to break into the music industry. She says people would drink together after his show. One night, she says, he offered to take her home, but as with Emma, instead drove to a flat. She said she wasn't immediately worried because he was her boss. Sophie says she was intoxicated and remembers certain parts of sex happening, but not remember it in full. She does remember that it was unwanted. Talia was 20 when she met Westwood in 2012. She says she was left completely shocked by her encounter with the DJ and thought of going to the police, but she didn't think they would take it seriously. Mr. Westwood was at the height of his career. He had been at Radio 1 for 16 years and was in demand as a club DJ, particularly for student nights. Talia was studying at Nottingham and went to a club night in a venue at the city called Oceana. She recalls the DJ pointing her out to someone she took to be his bodyguard. He came over and told her Mr. Westwood wanted to stay behind at the end of the night. She and the DJ posed for a photo together and then offered to drop her and her friend back to university halls. But the plans changed. They ended up at Mr. Westwood's hotel. Maybe this was just me being naive, she said, because my friend and I thought it was just going to be a chat and that we would be, I'd go back to the halls. Then Talia and Mr. Westwood went to his hotel room where they began kissing, but very quickly he had removed all his clothes. I still had my clothes on. I wasn't expecting that to happen, she says. She says she told him that she didn't want to do anything like that because they hardly knew each other. I kept saying, no, we've just met. Let's just talk. I remember saying, oh, why don't we just have a conversation? Then obviously the struggle started and I kept saying no. She said he was then straddling her on the bed and was trying to get her to give him oral sex. I was just thinking, oh God, this can't be happening. Here is this tall, man, just towering over me, and I just felt, caged, like I couldn't get out, and I was saying no, so I felt really powerless, I'd say, in that moment. She says, then he forced his penis into her mouth. Talia left the hotel and returned to university halls. According to the 2003 Sexual Offences Act, the intentional penetration of a mouth with a penis without consent could meet the legal definition of rape. I don't like that. Reflecting now, Talia says she feels dirty. I feel like I shouldn't have gone with him, and maybe it's my fault, and that I did that. And at that time, I didn't know that it was happening to all these other women. I thought it was just me. Talia's friend, Tatiana, told the BBC that she bumped into Mr. Westwood at a bar in Nottingham a month or two later. She asked him about Talia and was shocked when he said he didn't remember her. Shortly afterwards, he touched her friend's bottom, smacked it almost, and when she turned in to challenge him, he sipped on his drink like nothing had happened. Two other women, Josie and Ilsa, said that Mr. Westwood behaved inappropriately after brief encounters with him in public. Josie had been shopping in London in 2018 when she recognized the DJ and asked to have a photo taken with him, but she says he started messaging her and calling her regularly, pestering her to come over to his house. She says during a FaceTime call he unzipped his trousers and moved the phone down before she could hang up. She hung up. before hang up. I think you want to say is that a pun? Anyway, she says he messaged afterwards saying he was sorry and he'd been joking. The previous summer, August 2017, Ilse went to Capital Extra event at Box Park, Croydon, where Mr. Westwood was handing out flyers. He approached Ilse and her friend. Ilse took a snapshot chat video with him and says he immediately afterwards started rubbing his genitals against her. She froze and she says the incident was unsettling and traumatic. Like many other women, Elizabeth says that she met Mr. Westwood at a club night in 2019. She was 19 and he was in his 60s. She says over the next year, they met several times and had 2 sexual encounters, which she describes as consensual but uncomfortable, partly because of the age difference and partly because he put pressure on her to drink a lot. She recalls telling him she was about to turn 20, and he replied saying he wished he had more time to have sex with her when she was a teenager. Wow, look at him there. That says it all. Mr. Westwood worked at Capital Radio between 1987 and 1994, where he went to work for Capital Extra in 2013. For this latest investigation, the BBC asked Global, which owns Capital Radio and Capital Extra, whether it had received any complaints about Mr. Westwood. The spokesman said, "If Global is going to provide comment, we will let you know. We'll let you know if we're going to comment." That's awful. Mr. Westwood worked at the BBC for 19 years. BBC Director General Tim Davies, speaking at the corporation, unveiled its annual report on Tuesday, said that claims against Mr. Westwood would be investigated and a report published within 2 weeks. "We have an internal audit separate to myself, working to a senior independent director, Nick Sirota." They had to put an independent, but it's an internal audit. Going through now, responding to anything that comes up, coming into us. We have no objective apart from to ensure everything is flushed out and we understand exactly what's happening in regard to the BBC, and also to do the right thing and ensure any cases are looked at. This article has been updated to include more information on the law in response to audiences' questions. Have they? Wow. That is the 2 articles that the BBC produced with their adverts about their own documentaries included. And that's what I wanted to go through. They're by Chichi Uzundu and Ruth Evans. And Ruth Evans, like I said, I've spoken to Ruth Evans. And here he is. And this is the Guardian piece around the same time. And Tim Westwood faces bullying allegations inside BBC by Radio 1 DJ. Now, I'm not going to tell you this because this will tell you basically the same thing. Several younger women, it talks about other things, but the title, it says Tim Westwood faced bullying allegations outside BBC or Radio 1 DJ, but it doesn't want to tell you the rest, doesn't it? It's all limiting. It's all about damage, limitation. Damage, limitation. Damage, limitation. That's what BBC are all about. That's what they're about in the BBC, in their own in-house investigation of Tim Westwood. You're going to hear more about this case. You're going to hear loads more about this case. You're going to hear it all over the place. Once it eventually breaks, once loads of people come out and talk about their experiences with Tim Westwood, you're going to see the BBC have to scramble and say, "Oh, well, we started reporting on it, didn't we? We started reporting on it and we said, oh, look, this is how much information we didn't get given out. No, we can't help it if no one else comes forward. And we only found the other documents that will be included in that later on, didn't we? We only found those later on." In April last year, they were saying, no, there's been no reports at all. Then they were saying, yeah, there were reports. And they were saying, oh, look, all of these things by here. And what it means is we haven't looked properly and we haven't done our job properly. We didn't used to do due diligence properly. And we didn't safeguard at all until about the turn of the millennium. And they want you now to believe that they're going to expose all of this for you. BBC News are going to expose BBC for their BBC employee and doing bad things at the BBC, sometimes to people who are employed by the BBC. So there's a lot about this, and there's a lot more. I think this will come back around. I wanted to cover this on the NEWSHOUND because it's really important to see the articles themselves, read them through, and to understand how these people work in putting restrictions on reporting so they still look like they're the heroes and the saviors, but in actual fact they work for the villain and they are the villains. To go through the center of for journalism, investigative journalism, and put Chatham House rules Chatham House Rule apply on the conference means that people could not report on it properly. Limitations to reporting, and that's what the BBC are all about in this. Limitations to reporting about their own guy committing crimes, and it's going to be so much more. And once the black community gets up off its arse and starts doing something about this, things will change quickly, because it is the fear within inside the black community in the UK that's stopping these girls and these women from talking about it, because there was lots of gangsters and yardie gangsters and really evil and really dangerous people and really big criminals who were hanging around with Tim Westwood. They were gaining from the relationship too, and they're scared. They say about Tim Westwood, it means they say about these guys too. You need to. You all need to. So I don't know if you would have enjoyed that, but for those who are interested in it, I hope it's brought you a bit of understanding of what's happening here. Don't be naive. Don't believe the BBC when they say they're trying to solve their own problem in-house and they'll be open and honest about it. They've proven over and over again they can't be trusted. All of these inquiries they'll set up around it, all of these different inquests, all of these different things that will happen, will be gerrymandered by the same people who do other inquiries and other inquests in other dramatic cases. So the one who's tipped for doing inquiry into this also did one about the bullying and harassment in UK Parliament. And this is what you'll see. They'll bring in the same people to do the cover-up every single time. They did the same thing with Kendall House and with Jimmy Savile and other things. They brought the same people in. And they trusted people, trusted cleanup crew. So when you see those people who took part of that, Ruth Evans, Chichi Azundu, and the rest of them, know what they are. They work for BBC and Guardian, and they're protecting an establishment that they work for, that they're loyal to. Don't see them as journalists. They're cleanup crew. They're mop-up squad. So you can catch my work, as you know, on Fungi Monkey, johnnyvedmore.com, unlimitedhangout.com. There's a big article coming out soon on unlimitedhangout.com. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So it will come out. It'll probably be in multiple parts, but released at the same time. It's going to be exciting. So please come and see it, and spread the word about this, especially if you're in the black community. Try and get other people in the black community to talk to their friends and relatives about what's happened to them in the past, and start coming out and saying about how this big tall white guy who was protected by a load of black people at the time and the BBC, and it allowed him to rape a load of black girls, because that's what's being alleged. From a sad one, I hope you enjoyed this NEWSHOUND. Goodbye.
Young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina, and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets.